everybody. My name is Paula Price, and I'm delighted to have you here for today's webinar. It is Law Student Success in Practice, the Long Game. And today's webinar is really about building on practices that will set you up for success as a student, but also as a lawyer. So this webinar is for law students and for lawyers who want to develop practices for long-term growth and success. What you can expect today is a 1 hour long webinar. I'll speak for about 45 minutes, and at the end we'll have a 15-minute Q&A. For questions and comments, please use the Q&A function on the toolbar. I will not be looking at the questions until we get to that 45-minute mark. You may keep the window open. You can submit your questions anonymously. And if you see questions that come in that you like, you can always upvote them. Hit the thumbs up button, and that will promote any popular questions to the top of the list. For chat, likewise, I won't be keeping an eye on chat today. It's too distracting while I'm speaking. But if you have anything you'd like to put in the chat, I would invite you to do that. And that's it. So I'd like to move into acknowledgements, and I'm broadcasting out of Vancouver, Canada. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am seated is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and that includes the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I recognize that we have attendees from British Columbia, other parts of British Columbia, and other Canadian provinces. So I would just like to extend that acknowledgement as it applies to you. I'd also like to acknowledge everybody who is here today, and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join me today. I believe I have a number of law students on the line, and those are students from different years. So maybe you're a first-year student and you're starting to think about the interview process and how to prepare. Maybe you've finished your second year and you're summaring at a law firm and you're looking for strategies to thrive, particularly in a virtual environment. Maybe you are an articling student or you're looking for articling positions and you're looking for some advice or some tips on how to approach that. I also am delighted to welcome any law school career advisors or in-house talent management professionals at law firms. I hope that the tips and strategies that we cover today will be helpful for you. We're going to go through 5 core practices, and I will just give you a heads up in terms of what they are, and then we'll go into each of them in more detail. The first is plant a garden of goals. The second is macro and micro manage your time. 3 is compel action with words. 4 is connect and contribute. And 5 is to reframe failure. So plant a garden of goals. I decided to go with a bit of an unusual theme for this particular practice because I think goals are something that we often take for granted. There's a lot of talk about goals, and with all that attention, sometimes we can really lose focus and not really dig into what the goals are, what the purpose of the goals are, or what we're trying to achieve. So I decided to use a garden analogy to really give some life to the different goals that we set. So in a garden, you might see trees, you might see vegetables, flowers, and those pesky weeds. And the idea here is to set yourself up with a variety of plants and to make sure this is your life, it's your garden. Now, if you'll just bear with me for a moment, there are a number of questions. I just want to be sure. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, there we go. I just want to be sure. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't actually look at the questions while I'm in this screen view. So we'll get to the questions afterwards. Going back to the goals, so we have these different types of goals. Now, beginning with trees, these are really the anchors. So these are the goals that require long-term planning and they frame the smaller goals. So at your stage, it might be something like law school and getting into law school, completing law school. It may be articling, getting called to the bar. Maybe it's your first job as a lawyer. So actually, sorry, I'm just going to stop my share for one moment and turn. Okay, I see. Okay, sorry. I now see I will come back to your questions. Hi, I will come back to your questions. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a tech issue. So it looks like everybody's still able to see me. So yeah, so these are the big goals. These are the goals that you'll need to plan well in advance. You'll want to make sure that that you're planning these well before they happen, and these have one role in your goal setting garden. The second piece of goal setting is the vegetables, and so these are really the shorter term goals that will make the larger term goals possible. Now, I realize this probably doesn't quite add up from a pure gardening perspective, but the idea here is to really be thinking about your goals in terms of the long-term goals, the larger ones, the big blocks, and then looking at the smaller goals, the ones that require the short-term planning that make it possible. So to finish law school, you need to successfully complete your courses. To finish your articles, you need to check off a certain number of items on your list. You need to develop practical skills. You need to complete projects. So when you're thinking about your goals, these are different categories to consider. I added flowers. Flowers just because if you are, you need to have these are things that balance out your achievement goals. So for example, you want to re-energize and you want to also have goals that will help you with your scheduling. So if all of your scheduling, and we'll get to time management a little bit later, but if all your scheduling is around the actionable, sort of goal-oriented, professional focused activities, it can get, sometimes you'll lose motivation, or you may find that your energy isn't where it should be. So if you plant at leisure and rest, time with your family, some hobbies, interests, that will help you recharge, and you'll actually be more effective when it comes to those achievement oriented goals. And finally, weeds. You must weed your garden. If you don't weed your garden, nobody else will. And this really means keeping track of what is going on around you. It may be that there are things that you have signed up for that you really should say no to. So think about what that means for you. Weeds have the unfortunate consequence of crowding out growth. So it may be that you're so focused on these things that you think you should be doing, but that actually keeps you engaged and occupied, and you're not able to take on other projects that might be more useful or help you achieve what you're really looking to accomplish. So examples of that might be commitments that don't align with your goals, or habits that don't serve you. So there may be activities or projects that you were once involved in that just aren't as interesting for you anymore. So when it comes to setting goals, I've got a number of tips here. Number one is write them down. Goals are so much more likely to be achieved if you've written them down and you can see them. Better yet, post them where you can see them. And the neat thing about having goals is that if you keep them, you may lose track of them, and then a few years later you go back and you find them and you can see that actually all these things that you wrote down at one point are things that you've now accomplished. So I highly encourage you to write down your goals, keep them safe, keep them posted. It's a really strong tool, very effective and very simple. The second item is to use SMART goals. And there's no real magic behind a SMART goal. You can Google it, and I'll go through one just to give you an example, but it's an acronym. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-oriented. So, for example, one thing that I think a lot of students are thinking about right now, or ought to be thinking about right now, is expanding their professional network. And so networking might be your goal. So if you wanted to make that goal specific, you wouldn't necessarily say, I want to network. You would say, I want to meet a certain number of lawyers And to make that even more specific, I want to meet, maybe you're interested in a commercial litigation practice. I want to meet 5 commercial litigation lawyers in the next 2 months. So your measurable is there. You want to meet 5 of them in the next 2 months. It's achievable. Although I will come back to you about achievable. It is relevant. So then you have to think about, okay, where does this fit into the big picture? Well, I want to become a commercial litigator. One step toward that is to learn what a commercial litigator does, how they build a successful practice. I'm going to speak to people who have done that. Maybe you pick people at different stages of their practice so that you can learn from them and move forward. And then time related. So give yourself a what by when date, and that makes it more likely that you'll actually follow through on your goal. So that is a very quick analysis of a SMART goal. Again, like I said, you can Google it, you can go more in depth, but the idea is to have a framework when you're setting your goals that makes them more specific and more actionable. My third point here is to make lofty and to make small goals. So going back to that achievable point in the SMART goal, I believe that you should make goals that are really stretch, far-reaching goals. And doesn't mean that all of your goals need to be like this, but sometimes if you set your sights further ahead than what is truly achievable, it will inspire you to think outside the box and to take action and take steps that you might not otherwise be taking. I also think there's a place for small, achievable goals. And that's especially true if you're starting out on a project and you want to create some initial wins up front so that you can gain momentum and feel energized and motivated toward further steps towards your goals. So going back to the trees and the vegetables, it takes a long time to grow a tree. It's much easier to grow a stalk of beans. So give yourself a few of those shorter term goals to really build your confidence, build your momentum. Number 4 is to use timelines. And here I've suggested 1, 3, and 5 year timelines. There's no magic number. You can also do much shorter timelines. But the idea here is to really think about, if you were to project out 1 year, what is it that you want to achieve within the time frame between now and then? And as you do that exercise and you reflect out further, it actually helps you mentally think about, okay, if what I want 1 year from now is to be, let's say it's hired back at my law firm into the commercial litigation practice group, what does that look like? And then you can start to think backwards about the steps that you would need to take to get there. So maybe it's getting experience in court. Maybe it's getting experience with lawyers that are in the commercial litigation practice group. How do I get there? Well, it means I need to initiate contact if I haven't already. I need to seek out work assignments. What have other lawyers that have gone before me, what have they done to be successful? So having the timelines lets you look forward and then work your way backwards. And finally, number 5 is let your imagination go free. And this really goes back to the original point. When you're setting goals, you get to really be creative. Don't limit yourself to what is possible. Think a little bit outside the box, and that will really push you. And this quote really follows that idea. The real purpose of a goal is not to hit the goal, it's to develop yourself into the type of person who can achieve any goal you set. And I believe this to be true. And I'd like you to think about that as you're planning your goals, is not just the goal that you're setting and are you going to hit that exact target, but what are you doing? What steps are you taking? What stretch opportunities are you looking for and taking on in order to reach this goal? Before we move on to the next practice, I do want to touch a little bit on values. And you may be more in touch with your values than I was. When I was a student, I was really not. It wasn't until I was probably in my 40s that I actually sat down and did a values exercise. And I learned a lot about myself and what is important to me. And everybody has their own unique set of values. And if I look back, I can say that certainly my values have evolved over time. So what you'll consider really important as you're emerging from law school and starting at a law firm is that your values are quite different, quite possibly from 20 years into practice. And so this is an exercise that I would invite you to do regularly. And the reason that values are important is because they provide a framework for your decision making. It becomes a lot easier to know whether or not a decision is right for you if you know what's really motivating you. So ways to assess what your values are is to ask what's important to you. What is non-negotiable in your day? That could be that it's time that you spend with family. It may be that when you do work, when you submit an assignment, when you study for a test, when you are maybe you're already working at a law firm, it's the quality of work that you deliver. It may be integrity. It can be a lot of things. It may be your health. Number three, how do you spend your time? This is a really good indicator of what your values are. So for me, sometimes it's what am I looking up online before I fall asleep at night? Those are some of the topics that maybe are really important to me. Another indicator is what creates flow. So I think we've all been in that situation where we are working on something and we're just so absorbed in what we're doing that we don't even realize that time is ticking by. So that type of activity is likely something that aligns with something that you really value. And finally, another way of assessing values is to ask yourself what success looks like for you. And in that image of success, what is it? I mean, is it having a degree of responsibility? Is it that you are helping a large number of people? Is it financial compensation? I mean, there are all these different pieces that make up the different elements of your life. And the question is to really step back and to ask yourself, what is important to me? And that the answer to that question is your values, and you can use those when you're setting your goals to make sure that the goals and your values are in alignment. So the second practice that we're going to look at is managing your time. And I've broken it into macro managing your time and micro managing your time. And the idea here is to use your time. So if you go back into the macro, this is really taking a bird's eye view and looking at how you spend pockets of your time. So if you look at the weeks, the months, the years, does your allocation of time reflect your goals and your values? And I think this is a really important factor to consider. For some people, and I'll use a couple of examples. Netflix is one of those things where people will say, oh, I haven't had a chance to sit down and just veg out in front of Netflix. I can tell you since COVID, I don't think I've watched a minute of Netflix. I've been too busy. But if I ask myself, does that really matter? The answer is no, because I don't actually get that much enjoyment out of watching Netflix. And a lot of people do, and there are moments where I have. But to me, this doesn't factor into the micro macro planning. It's just not that important. For others, you may have a desire to work, and for some people, they will have a capacity and a desire to do really long days. They want to work really hard. That to them is fulfilling. Whereas for others, they don't want to have that much work in the course of their days or their weeks. They need a higher degree of leisure. Beware of things that you feel like you should be doing, and instead look at the way that you've allocated your time in terms of, is this what I want to be doing? And one form of litmus test is to say, am I happy, right? And you may find that there are periods where there's more work than you would like, or more leisure than you would like. And these things will all balance out over time. But the idea here is to be ensuring that that the balance that you achieve overall is a balance that works for you. It's really, really easy to not focus on the macro. The macro also includes this idea of strategic planning. So let's say you would like to plant this tree and have a giant oak tree 20 years from now. Well, you're going to have to start doing that now. And we can get really caught up in busyness and overlook to do those types of things that will create, set the big block items. I would encourage you to step back and spend the time and think about what are the things I need to do today in order to have those results down the road. And it could be that you want to start speaking more. Okay, well, maybe you need to take steps to apply for speaking engagements, or maybe you really want to work with a certain lawyer. And so maybe it's starting to develop that relationship early so that you will then begin working with them down the road. Maybe you are in the process of looking at law firms that you want to apply to. Well, what steps can you take now that will increase your opportunities down the road? And that's really where the longer term planning comes in. In addition to the larger picture planning, there's the smaller picture planning. And this is really looking at what are you doing on a day-to-day basis. And you know that you're doing a good job of your micro planning if you know what you need to do every day. So keeping track of your to-do list, deadlines, are you meeting your deadlines? Are you using your time efficiently? So there are different ways of structuring your day. Some are efficient, others are not. So how are you being mindful of that? Are you being efficient with your energy? I know for myself, and I know for clients that I've worked with, different times of day are better for doing certain tasks. There's one school of thought that says you should eat the frog first. So if you've got an assignment that that you're not dying to jump into, maybe that's the one that goes first on the list. For myself, certain items will get procrastinated. Maybe it's paperwork that's not urgent. Sometimes I'll have to move that to the first item on my desk in the morning, simply so that it gets done. That's one way of approaching time. Another is, when do you have the best thinking time? You may be in your program at a law firm. You may have a memo that you're writing, an assignment that takes a lot of heavy mental lifting. You might want to schedule that early in the day at a time when you're less likely to be interrupted. You might schedule your emails. Maybe you only look at your emails at certain times during the day. But there's ways of structuring your time using both time and energy to make sure that you're being efficient. And this last question, can you be trusted to get things done? I mean, that is a real litmus test and something that will come up in your program, but also in a law firm context is, can lawyers depend on you to get things done in time, and give them enough time to do what they need to do with the projects? So if you have poor time management, as a lawyer, this can lead to a number of pitfalls. And these are things that I've seen both while I was practicing as a lawyer, but also in my coaching practice. And so if you're not taking the time to do the long-term planning, you may find that you end up drifting on your career path. You're not really sure what you're doing, where you need to go next, where you want to go next. And that can lead to restlessness and procrastination, and this sort of malaise almost around some of your work, and not really understanding why you don't want to just go ahead and do it. At a more micro level, when you don't have control over your days, when you don't know what needs to be done, it can cause a lot of anxiety. You can also have some performance issues if things aren't getting done on time, or if they're coming in so close to the wire that the lawyer that you're working for is unable to really adequately process that work product. It can become a performance problem, and it can also lead to trust breakdowns. So if you can't be depended on for delivering on time, that is, delivering something on time is a really easy way to build trust. It's also a really easy way to lose it. So these are all pitfalls that you might see, and so it's something that I encourage you to work toward avoiding. Failing to plan is planning to fail. This quote had a number of authors attributed to it when I looked at it this morning, and so I decided to pick Sir Winston Churchill because I quite like him. And this is really true. Planning really is at the essence of time management. So a few tips on how to manage your time effectively. Number one is intake, looking at the sources of work as it comes in? Where are the different sources of things that end up on your to-do list? And what are you doing to control the flow of the intake? So is everything a yes? Are there things that you maybe say no to? This is your first item of business, is to figure out where things are coming from. And that if you're really just starting out, is to create a list of all the different items that appear on your to-do list, or that should appear on your to-do list, so that you've got an inventory of things to do, and then you can figure out how you're going to plan them going forward. Number two is probably the most important, at least I think it is planning. And I've seen really excellent progress in lawyers who have gone from a reactive way of practicing to a proactive way of practicing. And the biggest shift for them was engaging in a regular planning exercise. So that likely means that those lawyers will allocate time, usually in the morning. Maybe there's more time in the afternoon. So the morning would be to plan out the day. The afternoon would be to review what has happened over the course of the day and look at the to-do list for the following day. Planning also needs to happen at a more macro level. So that may mean that at the beginning of the week, you're looking out forward to see what needs to get accomplished between the Monday and the Friday, for example. You may also need to go further back. If you are planning for a large, I used to litigate. So if I had a court application that was coming up in a certain number of weeks, then it's having that date on the calendar and working backwards to make sure that all the filing deadlines are met. So planning really is in itself an exercise, a practice that is essential to having effective time management. And so I would encourage you to think about how you plan your time, set aside the time to plan, and find ways that are effective for you. Accountability, I've put this here because for some people, the planning versus the doing becomes a challenge. And so accountability is a way of making sure that you complete the task. So for some people, that might mean creating some artificial deadlines. One thing that I like to do is to set up an event or a meeting with somebody. So let's say I have a project that I'm working on, or when I was practicing, maybe it's a research problem, to set an update meeting with a lawyer that I'm working with, or just tell them I'm going to update you on such and such date, because it forces me to then sit down and do the work so that I'm ready for that meeting or for that report. When you do start developing your time management practice, it's important to evaluate. So what works for you at one stage of your career may not work for you at a later stage of your career. And similarly, what works for one lawyer may not work for another. So there are a number of time management systems out there, and I think everybody will have a system that they find works for them. So absolutely feel free to go and ask lawyers in your firm how they manage their time. How do they structure their files? How do they keep on top of deadlines? And adopt what is helpful for you. Finally, adapt. So this is kind of going back to this idea that things can change over time. So if you find that a practice isn't working for you, think about how you could alter it so that it would work for you. So we're now at point 3 of 5. And so I'm just going to pause for a moment. I'm going to speak a little bit more about a course that I'm offering and that I'm just completing the first session of. And one of the topics that I cover is effective writing. And I had an aha moment when I was preparing for that lesson. The aha being something that is almost so obvious that I couldn't believe it was an aha moment. But I was trying to distinguish academic writing from writing in a business context. And the key difference that I could identify is this. In an academic context, the writing that you do typically is designed to show an instructor that you understand the concept. And in a business context, the writing that you do is actually designed to compel the taking of a step. So let me give an example. If you are making submissions in court, you're not making submissions because they sound nice or because you're looking for a good letter grade. You are making submissions because you want the judge to make an order, to decide in favor of your client. And your job is to take the judge and give the judge the tools, the information, the path that he or she needs to then take that step that is what you would like them to take. If you are writing an email to a client, maybe you're asking for instructions. The purpose of that communication is to set up the email, to set up the information in such a way that the client is then positioned to go ahead and give you those instructions. So um, those are a couple of examples. You may be asking for an extension on a deadline. So you need to then create the build up. What is the rationale and what is it exactly that you're seeking? And this is true not just in your written communications, it is also true in your practical, your spoken communication. So when you go to speak to a lawyer in your firm, for example, you may have an assignment and you need clarification on something within that assignment. So your presentation to the lawyer that you're going to speak to may be something like, here's the explanation of what I understood to be the assignment. Here are the steps that I have taken. Here's where I see the roadblock. Here's what I need your help answering, and laying out the path so that the person that you're speaking with knows what it is that you would like them to do. So when it comes to communication, particularly in a business setting, clarity is really important. Um, Here I've got a few bullet points. Number one is point first. So letting somebody know upfront, whether it's an email, whether it's a memo, whether you're knocking on their door and you have a question to ask them, exactly what is the point of this communication. The second is a roadmap. It helps the recipient of information to know where and how to process information if they know ahead of time what's happening. So today I tried to give you an outline of the 5 points that we're going to cover, a time estimate so you know how long you're going to be here, and at the end of it, what is going to happen. So that's the next piece, which is a call to action. And I've borrowed this language from the internet. You often hear of that, a call to action on a web page, for example, click here. In a professional context, if you're asking your client for instructions, you really need to be clear in your mind when you go into that meeting what it is that you would like to walk away from. And finally, making it easy. So in your communications, for example, with another lawyer, let's say that you are coming up against a timeline situation. You have an assignment, you are midway through, you just unearthed an issue that nobody had really seen, and you realize that you may need either extra time or you may need extra help. You might go to that lawyer with a proposal. Okay, well, what if I did this, but we brought somebody else in to do that? What if we extend the time? Coming to the interaction with ideas already formed. If you're speaking to a judge, for example, maybe there's, I remember one case that I worked on where we were referring to a number of very small details that were contained in a large volume of documents. So what if you take the information and you digest it and then create a smaller attachment, maybe it's an email with information attached, but find a way to package the heavy data so that you can still deliver it. They have all the information they need, but you've also done the work of synthesizing it and making it easy for them to take that next step. Again, going back to a court example, maybe your written submissions are so elegant that the judge can simply adopt them, copy and paste them effectively into their judgment. You write a memo that is for, maybe it's an email that you write to a lawyer in your firm that summarizes some aspect of law that you've been asked to look into, can you draft that email in such a way that it is easily flippable to the client? So you're writing, you're trying to compel action, and in your mind, you can be thinking about, how am I going to do that? How am I going to make this communication translate it into a step forward? So number 4 is connect and contribute. And this is, in terms of practices for long-term success, this really is all about developing a professional network. And I did a webinar yesterday, and I'll share a link. I'll follow up with an email from this webinar with a link to yesterday's webinar. I had 2 speakers, Cleo Kirkland, managing partner of Korn Ferry in Toronto and Montreal, and Eric Pye, who is the career services advisor at CPLED. And they both told very, very interesting and compelling stories about the importance of growing their network. At one point, Cleo was talking about her current practice, which is reaching out to about 15 individuals every week, and she continues to do this. Eric gave an example of when he was looking for a job at one point many years ago, and over the course of 3 months, he reached out and connected with 100 individuals. He had 100 informational interviews. And I bring up these numbers because the process of networking, of expanding the members or the community in your professional network, is something that is easily overlooked, especially when you're a student and you think, well, how am I going to do this? Why would I do this? If this is something that you do over time, your network will grow, and it can bring to you a lot of really enriching benefits, opportunities in terms of career opportunities, that may be job opportunities, maybe it's referrals from other lawyers or other professionals, mentorship opportunities. So you may have a formal mentorship structure within your law firm, you may not, but there is nothing stopping you, regardless, from seeking out individuals who may serve as mentors to you in your career development and friendship. And for those of you who are shy or reluctant, or really just don't want to take that step to network, that process can be a lot more appealing if it's based on reaching out and connecting to really connect on common ground. So one way of networking, particularly in this digital context, is through LinkedIn. And LinkedIn allows you to, and I'm not a LinkedIn salesperson by any stretch, but I do find it to be a very engaging platform for sharing and getting to know other professionals, especially in the legal community. There's a lot of lawyers who hang out on LinkedIn. And what I have found is it's been really wonderful to connect with others on LinkedIn who have something in common. And at this point in particular, with everybody working remote, or not everybody working remotely, but with a large number of professionals working remotely, it is in some ways easier to reach out and make those connections. Your options are fewer. You don't have to worry about, is it a coffee date or a phone call? Your options are really phone call, Zoom, and email for the most part. So I would encourage you, as you progress through your career, to really focus on building your network. And the last practice that I'm going to talk about today is to reframe the idea of failure. And this, I think, is a big one, especially for lawyers, especially for law students. I know when I was going through school, and for most of the time that I was practicing, I was really, really obsessed with this idea of not wanting to fail. I saw failure as a really horrible and terrible thing. And I'm not advocating going out and being careless, but I am advocating stretching yourself to the point where you need to grow. The definition of failure, I've copied it out here: omission of occurrence or performance, specifically a failing to perform a duty or expected action. And the nice thing about this definition is that you can control your expectations. So to put this into a more practical example, or another way of looking at it, we can go back to this goal setting concept. You may look at a large project and think about all the different goals that you have along the way. So you can evaluate, let's say that you have a goal and maybe your goal is to reach out and connect with 5 litigation lawyers over the next 2 weeks. And so you go onto LinkedIn, you send some emails, you connect with some of them, not with others. Maybe some of the conversations go completely sideways. Maybe some of them are very successful. Let's say you had a conversation that went sideways. You might look back and say, well, okay, it wasn't exactly how I expected it, but what did I learn from that? And there's a wonderful coach who I follow, who was talking about failures and how they actually go ahead and if they want failures. They want to have 5 failures every month. And those failures are really a sign that they are actually trying new things and they are growing. So trying to reframe the way that you look at setbacks is key to developing practice over the long run. I mean, you may go to court. I've seen this. I've been in this position where you go in and you make your submissions and you don't get what you want. And that is really, really awful. It's a terrible feeling as a lawyer. But every quote failure is also an opportunity to learn. Okay, well, what did I learn about that experience? What am I going to do differently going forward? And I would encourage you, every time you have, maybe it's a misstep with a lawyer, maybe it's an assignment that is covered in red ink. I mean, you're going to get feedback. Use these opportunities to grow. So think about what went well. What would you have done differently with the information that you now know? And most importantly, what will you try next? So once you've had that initial feedback, how are you going to apply it moving forward? So that is really that wraps up the first part of the webinar. Those are the 5 practices that I think are really going to set you up for long-term success. So just in review, the first one is to plant a garden of goals. So set up goals, different types of goals, long-term and short-term in particular. Manage your time effectively. So taking a step back, looking at the macro goals, what is it that you're trying to accomplish over the long term? And what are the smaller goals that you need to accomplish in order to get there? Compel action using words. So when you go to communicate in a professional context, think about the outcome that you're trying to achieve and structure your communications to lead up and make that outcome achievable and doable. Connect and contribute. So as you move through your career, find ways to expand your network and reach out to other professionals in your community. And finally, redefine failure. So try to see setbacks as learning opportunities and distill from them lessons that you can apply moving forward. Now, before I turn to the Q&A, I just wanted to share about a program that I'm offering this summer. This is the second time I'll be offering the program. I'm in week 6 with a current group of students. I've got 13 incredible students, 12 from Canada and 1 from Norway. And we have been going through different lessons each week. And a lot of these lessons are reflect some of what we've just been talking about today. It's an online program. We meet every Thursday online, and we have a live session. It's a Zoom call. I record each session so that anyone who can't attend in person is able to watch the recording. And the recording goes into an online course platform. So the recording is there along with all the course materials. And the topics that we cover over the course of 6 weeks are goal setting, networking, time management, effective writing, presentation, and feedback. And to give you a bit of context, presentation, for example, we talked about how to present in a professional environment. I invited students to have the option of doing a presentation to me, and a number of the students took me up on that offer, and it was really wonderful. I was able to watch the students present and give them objective feedback that is helpful in terms of how they can then move forward. And the neat thing too, I've also had the opportunity to meet in person, I think, with almost all of the students, and that's been really, really rewarding. And I've really managed to develop quite a relationship. I'm going to miss the students when they move forward, because I think it's been a really wonderful chance to get to know each other and to really try to help them, not just in terms of the instruction, the substantive content of the lessons, but what I'm really trying to help students achieve is to have the shift in thinking that I think is so important between the academic context and the professional one. In the academic context, a lot of what you need to do is laid out for you. The courses are structured in such a way that you all submit the same assignments, you're evaluated on using the same measures. There's a very clear linear path that is laid out for you in an academic environment, whereas the shift from that to a law firm environment is one where so much more of the onus is on you. There's this idea of being really your own entrepreneur, running your own business, and making that shift is a real change. And what I'm trying to encourage among the students is to start thinking about that at a very relatively early stage. So it's been a really amazing experience, and I'm starting another session this summer. Students that signed up in this round included some students who have just finished their first year of law school, who are looking at the job application process coming up next year and who want to develop some of their skills in terms of interviewing and preparing for their first experience in a law firm. Others are, they finished their second year and they're looking for articling positions, and again, want to develop their professional skills. And some are currently working in law firms and again are looking for some input on how best to do that. And some of the topics that we go into in a bit more depth are legal writing, so how to write effectively, really getting into the time management piece, and the confidence piece as well. How do you develop confidence in a professional context? The program starts next Thursday. It runs for 6 weeks. I mentioned the class has been held at noon on Thursdays. It's recorded, and I've also been holding office hours and one-to-one sessions with the students if they would like that. And if you are interested, I would invite you to check out my website or the course page. I'll send you a link in a follow-up email, but probably the easiest way is to go to uplevelcpd.com and click onto courses, and then the Not Your Average Summer Program, and you'll see it's the one with the young woman. And if you have any questions, email me. So I've left my email address here. You likely already have it, but if you have any questions about the course or you have concerns about the course, I would invite you to reach out to me. The cost of the course is $189 Canadian, including GST. And if cost is an issue for you, let me know, because I do want to make it accessible, and I'm mindful that these are somewhat trying times for a lot of people, and so I don't want that to be a deal breaker for somebody who's really interested in pursuing the course. So I'm going to exit my shared screen so that I can answer some of the questions that have come through. Okay. So the first question is an easy one. Will you be sending the recording to us? And the answer is yes. I will send you an email that has a recording of this webinar. Oh, and thank you for tuning in from Manchester. It's the Coast Salish people it's the Indigenous peoples of this particular part of British Columbia in Canada, and so it's an acknowledgement of the unceded territories that we're on. What is micro macro? If you'd like a copy of the slides, I'd ask that you please send me an email and I can send you a link. Micro and macro, it's really, I think I explained it in the context of the time management section. It's really looking at time management from the big picture and also the smaller picture. How do you keep positive in a negative, horrible world? Oh dear. I think the answer to that is to think about where you put your focus. And it's really challenging sometimes to find the silver lining, but I would invite you to try to develop a practice of doing that. Our brains are wired a certain way, and if we tend to focus on the things that are negative, we will see more of that. And if we can train ourselves to find the positive, we will actually see more of that as well. It doesn't change facts that are horrible, but it does change some of what goes on around us. And we really, another thing is to really focus on what's within your control versus what is outside of your control. So, for example, you may not have any control over what's happening outside of your own direct environment, but you can control the way that you think about it, and what you choose to do about it. You can't control other people, of course, but you can control yourself. Another thing that I think you can do to stay positive is with regard to goal setting. And so for myself, when I'm in a situation that is really a difficult one, or a situation that I anticipate is going to be difficult, I might set myself maybe 2 or 3 small goals or small things that I'm going to take away at the end of that experience so that I can focus my energy on these 3 things. And it helps me stay grounded. It helps me almost ignore some of the really negative things by really focusing in on the positive. This comes up, for example, with this idea of failure that I had talked about earlier. So if you set yourself up with a lofty goal, for example, and you don't make it to that goal, but you manage to accomplish a whole bunch of other things along the way, you can then look at those things that you did accomplish and feel good about those going forward, as opposed to lingering over the things that went sideways. So that's just a way of shifting your focus. I'm just looking at the next question now. I have a mentor. How do I get her to give me a training contract? Now, I imagine you're writing in likely from the UK. I think in Canada we talk about, we just use training contract a bit differently. How do you get somebody to give you a training contract? First of all, there has to be a training contract to be given. And I think what is a bit challenging about this particular stage that we're in is that the market is a bit uncertain. And so there are, in good news, there are some areas of law that are picking up, that are busier than normal. So labor and employment, for example, or bankruptcy and insolvency, class action, insurance. These are areas that I've been told, at least in the Canadian market, have been busier than others. For there to be a training contract, there needs to be the work first and foremost. How do you do that? Well, it's all the things that we just talked about. In a way, it's having goals and creating. Well, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's making a point of having goals that would meet where your goals would meet their need. And so it's developing the skills that you need to satisfy, to show value, to show that you're going to make a positive contribution. Are you doing your work on time? Are you delivering high quality products? Are you communicating in a way that is actionable? When you submit written work, are they able to use that work for the next step on a file? If you're communicating, are you doing it in a professional way? Are you able to build trust with clients? These are all things that you can do to increase the chances of having a permanent position offered to you. They may not have a position, in which case the networking piece becomes really valuable. Maybe there's nobody within your firm who can offer you a position, but there's somebody else out there that is looking for somebody. And from that perspective, what you'll really want to focus on is making sure that you have a good relationship, that you've done good work at the firm that you're at, so that people that you've worked with can give you a credible reference. And you'll also want to have a network outside of your firm, in case, well, to find jobs. If there's not a job available for you where you are, then there's that opportunity somewhere else. So those are a number of things that you can think about in terms of securing a training contract. And if that is an issue, or if you are looking, seeking employment, I will send a copy of yesterday's webinar, and there's some really good advice there about how to find work, the title was COVID disruption. The exact name escapes me right now, but the idea was how to really overcome these challenges, how to overcome adversity and build resilience going forward. What questions should I be asking my mentor to help me in applications for jobs? I think it depends on the stage that you're at. If you have narrowed down areas of law that you're interested in, then you might be asking for connections, people that your mentor may know who are in those fields who can help you. Again, I would refer you to yesterday's webinar. I'll be sending a link to it. And I think that's probably the best resource that I can offer at the moment. If you have more specific questions, you may email me, and I can get back to you. Can you translate this garden into real life examples? I think I did that in the course of the presentation, but looking at your big blocks and your small blocks. So let's say building a network, maybe your long-term goal is to have a really rich network of individuals who you have common interests with, who are able to support you, who you can refer work to, who will be referring work to you. That might be your tree. That's your big long-term goal. The short-term vegetable goals, if you will, are, how many people are you phoning or emailing or reaching out to every week? What strategies are you using? Are you using LinkedIn? Are you asking your existing contacts to put you in touch with other contacts? Are you making those interactions quality interactions? How much effort are you putting into how are you investing in those relationships, and are you following up? So that's a way of translating this larger picture, the big items, the trees, and then the smaller ones. Next question, how do you study how to be active and not keep falling asleep? Oh dear. Well, that's a good question. I guess take care of your health, get lots of sleep. If you are falling asleep, I would encourage you to take a break and be strategic. Give yourself rewards, lots of things. Thank you. I'm really appreciating these questions. This is wonderful. I'm going to try to get through them. And I think we're really getting close to 1 o'clock. So make courses free. I do offer a lot of free content online. I also have a blog that has a number of student-oriented topics. And so I'll go back to how do you block procrastination? Procrastination, I think for myself, what I think is one of the main reasons for procrastination is when there's a mismatch in alignment. And so we talked about goals and values, and then we have the tasks. And I see procrastination where there's a lack of alignment. So trying to find ways to align the task with the goal. So maybe the task is something that you really don't want to do on a file, but you need to do that work in order to be successful overall. So you may find a way to convince yourself that this is a good idea. I'll give you a personal example. I'm really passionate about the work that I do. I think it's really key for lawyers in particular to have some of the mindset tools that I've been learning about as an executive coach. And I know that if I sit in silence, nobody is going to hear about them. At least they're not going to hear about them from me. Public speaking is not something that comes naturally to me. But I know that if I speak in public, I'll be able to share my message with more people. So even though public speaking for me is a big hurdle, it's something that I have generally avoided my entire career. I am now seeking out opportunities to get in front of people because I want to share my message. So the procrastination piece there is, I really have tried to avoid it. But now I'm really seeking it out because it's important to this bigger picture. So that's one way to overcome procrastination, is to give yourself, is to contextualize it in a way that makes it something that you absolutely must do. Another way to deal with procrastination, a lot of procrastination is driven by fear. So, for example, today I wrote an email and I thought, I kind of wanted to put it off because I was afraid it wasn't going to be the perfect email. And so I told myself, this does not have to be the perfect email. It's more important to get a response out quickly than to write the perfect email. In this case, that worked. I wouldn't be advising giving legal opinions off the cuff. This was okay. So allowing yourself to not be perfect is another way to overcome procrastination, or assigning yourself a digestible, manageable goal. So maybe you don't want to do a task, but you can convince yourself to do that task for 10 minutes. I am going to skip to, I'm so sorry, I can't answer all these questions. How do I organize my life? That's a really excellent question. One that I don't have the ability to answer. I can't answer the question about why is America racist. I really can't do that right now. How would you recommend we stay? Weeding your garden is really, really tough. Really, really tough. There's an expression that I learned in coach training school. It goes like this: if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. I don't know how easy that is going to be to implement, but it is a bit of a barometer. If it's really exciting to you, go ahead and do it. If it doesn't align with all the other things that you're trying to accomplish, yes, you may have to be more selfish. It's really, really hard to do. Okay, I am going to have to. Okay, what is the hell yes question? I'm confused. Okay, I'll just answer that and then I'm going to let you go. The idea here is when you are taking in, when you're saying yes to something, really what you're doing is you're saying no to something else. So if, for example, one example that's, maybe it's a networking opportunity, a bit of a stretch at the moment, but imagine there's an event that you could go to in the middle of the day, and it would take you away from doing something else. Saying yes to that thing is saying no to another thing. And likewise, saying no to something opens up the space for a yes to something else. So the weeding process is an intake process. So for example, if somebody comes to you and asks you to get involved on a big project, the project has no interest to you and it has no relevance to any of the goals that are on your mind, you may be inclined to say yes to make that other person happy and to help them meet their goal. But for you, it's kind of like, this isn't going to really help me accomplish anything that's on my plate right now. And if I take that project on, it means less time that I'm spending on the work that I want to do. It's less time with my family. It's less time taking care of my health. So it's looking at the ask and putting it in relation to things that are already on your plate and goals that you already have. And is this something that I really, really want to do? And if it's not, then that's your opportunity to say no, thank you. And a no does not have to be rude. A no is simply, I would love to help you with that. I don't have the bandwidth to take that on right now. Nobody is going to fault you for saying no to a project. What would be less ideal would be to take on a project and then not complete it. So that is, I see so there are some more questions, but I'm afraid I won't be able to answer any more of those questions. And I am going to thank all of you and end the session. So thank you again, everybody, for joining me today. Again, by joining me today, you had to turn away other opportunities. So I really appreciate you spending this time with me. If you are interested in working with me more closely, I would highly encourage you to sign up for the course. And if you have any questions about it, send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. And, I'm wishing all of you a lot of success, and I hope that you are able to take these practices and implement them into your practice. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye for now.